Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Tuesday Tips. As always, I'm Michael Barber here on our Grow Schools channel. If you're not familiar with Tuesday Tips, we're here every Tuesday talking the biggest challenges facing school leaders. And a couple of weeks ago, we got some questions about fractional help, as well as how do you staff your school when there's moments of need and maybe you don't need to hire for a full-time role. So we asked our friends over at VChief and their CEO, Beth Jacobs, to come by. Beth, it's so good to see your face.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for having me.
Of course, we're really happy to have you here. As mentioned, we got some questions around how to really have some flexible staffing initiatives around charter schools. And I know your team works in a variety of capacities with schools all around the country on flexible needs like flexible CEO needs, flexible enrollment marketing assistants, flexible COO roles, really any management role in front office that you can help. So we thought there'd be some good questions to ask you and really discuss how bringing in experienced temporary leaders can help support with strategic initiatives or, helping schools grow as they're scaling those efforts. So I want to start right off here and get into the content in our conversation with question number one.
Mhm.
Tell us a little bit more how flexible executive staffing helps schools manage growth without sort of overwhelming their existing team.
That's a great question. I think, and that's actually one of the first questions that folks usually ask us. So, typically, interim or fractional talent can add value really quickly because they're bringing in expertise that's relevant to the challenges schools are facing in that moment. So, in many cases, they've tackled those challenges before. Given with the depth of their experience, they don't require a long onboarding period or on ramp before they deliver, which really saves those overwhelmed leaders a lot of work and time that they would normally need to dedicate to onboarding someone. So typically, fractional talent is very nimble and self-directed. The leader can trust the work is getting done without having to maintain close oversight of the work. So once their initial goals are met, they can roll off or pivot to another challenge as needed. When a leader brings in fractional talent for a specific need, they can really pinpoint the specialized expertise required for the context of their school and can hire exactly what's needed for them.
Yeah, it's so important that obviously someone, especially in a fractional role, gets off to a almost sprinting start, if you will, so that school leadership isn't overwhelmed by just bringing someone on board. I think that's such an important component of your team. Obviously, the experience working with charter school leaders super important to bring that context, and I think that's something your team brings. I want to ask specifically in conversations that where VChief is engaged in a fractional perspective.
Mhm.
What are you hearing from leadership in terms of gaps that schools are facing, and how can sort of flexible staffing really help effectively fill those gaps right now and like where we find ourselves in 2025?
So the gaps that we are hearing about is a lot of the ones that you've already spoken about. So in terms of a school going through a major change or initiative that they need help with, typically enrollment is always every year. It's a big project, and so it can be a wide variety. I would say that a lot of times, I'm just thinking of a couple examples of like we worked with a school whose COO was departing. The leader wasn't notified until late July. So clearly, it's a huge timing challenge. The school year started in mid-August, and the COO was so integral to just opening the school and the logistics. So an interim solution provided that relief while the school sought the real long-term permanent solution for them.
Yeah, such a good idea as if you're having gaps in sort of an urgent or semi-urgent basis. Certainly, fractional opportunities can help at least plug the hole, if you will, for lack of a better term,
Yeah.
until you bridge that gap as your board hires someone or the team that's hiring that individual comes on board.
Yeah, I think of it as just the space to breathe, right? Like nobody wants to be under the gun and hiring in those times where it feels like an emergency. You want to be able to make the right choice and the best choice for your school. You don't want to feel like you're under the gun. So it gives you the space to breathe and allow everyone to sit back and make a thoughtful choice.
Yeah, the space to breathe is such a good analogy to for school leaders to think about in this context. I want to ask, is Obviously your team has had a ton of conversations with school leaders, and they are often looking for specific things when they bring in temporary executives or temporary support. What do school leaders need to look for when bringing in those experienced or temporary executives? What are, to support strategic initiatives? There's obviously year one provider, but there are others that are out there. What's this type of questions they should be asking? What sort of things that should they be doing to confirm that your team is the right team to bring on board?
Sure. So a lot depends on the role and the initiative that you're hiring for. I would say the first thing to think about is how your team operates, how they communicate with each other, and ensuring that you have someone who matches that skill set. And then you want to look for kind of what the gap is. So you want to make sure in communication, culture, working styles that you have a match. You don't necessarily want a match when it comes to skill set and expertise. When it's a fractional or interim, uh, you're going to get the most out of it if you're looking for what your gap is and what that other leaders can fill. So thinking about, we call it your zone of genius. So looking at what is your team zone of genius, and then what is the zone of genius that you don't have. And I'm thinking, we heard from one client previously about finance. Oh man, finance is like taking out the trash. Somebody has to do it, but nobody wants to. I was horrified. I was like, finance is so fun. What are you even talking about? And that's what they needed. They needed someone who thought that finance was so fun and something that they really enjoyed. So thinking about where things need to match, and then where you really do not want everyone to have the same
Yeah.
expertise.
Another good analogy from you, zone of genius. I love that idea of school leaders thinking about, hey, this is how you can contextualize. Like if you have this gap of genius inside your organization, that's a way like fractional support can help, at least, perhaps it's a temporary, perhaps it's a little bit of a longer term role, but those gaps where you need some genius can certainly be an area where fractional support can be helpful. I wanted to talk about long-term impacts that strategic staffing or flexible staffing can have on a school's growth and operational efficiency, because obviously when school leaders think about an investment, whether it is a full-time team member or someone that's fractional, providing that fractional support, it's going to have a big impact on the organization for the long term. You're always thinking about short-term and long-term impacts on an organization. Talk about the long-term impacts of fractional opportunities inside of a charter school.
Yeah. So I think long term in a charter school, a short term project can lead to really long term changes and results for a school. So I would say, for example, there is always a ramp up period to anything. So I'm thinking of one school that was adding grade levels. It's really exciting. It fit in with all of their strategic initiatives. Did they need somebody to come in forever and help them grow in that way? No, it really allowed them a time that was very task heavy and defined, to start planning well in advance, to work through the full process, ramp up for 1 year, and then get the school off the ground, and then really have that person roll off. But the long-term impact of that was massive.
Yeah, that's such a good insight about thinking about how fractional support can certainly impact things over the long term for a school. Well, we try and keep these conversations right at 10 minutes, and I've got a bunch more questions. So we're going to have Beth come back for a second conversation. We'll get that scheduled with Beth and her team. But really appreciate you, Beth, for coming on for Tuesday Tips and having a conversation about specifically, how schools can grow without overstretching their team and leveraging flexible staffing solutions like your teams at V-Chiefs. Give us an idea, and the school leaders that might be listening, where they can find more information about you and your team. What's the best way to connect with you all?
Sure. Find us at vchiefs.com, and on LinkedIn at vchief.
Wonderful. Well, give a big thank you to Beth Jacobs, the president and co-CEO of V-Chiefs, for joining us today on Tuesday Tips. we'll have to have her back for another conversation around how to leverage flexible staffing. I've got some questions on budgets and whatnot, so we'll bring her back for another conversation in the future. But say a big thank you to Beth again for joining us, and to all of you who took the time to listen in on Tuesday Tips today. Just a reminder, we're here every Tuesday right here on the Grow Schools channel, talking the biggest challenges facing school leaders, and we'll be back next week with another episode. Take care until then. Bye-bye.
Thanks for having me.